So, over the weekend, Lamar Jackson, I believe, separated himself in the MVP discussion. They played the Texans and beat them 41-7, absolutely annihilated the Texans. And we can get into the total team effort in just a little bit, but to emphasize what I wanted to talk about specifically Lamar Jackson and how he is separating himself in the MVP discussion from Russell Wilson and all the other candidates. When you look at what he's doing, I mean, like I said last week, it's spectacular. I've never seen anything really quite like this. Dude threw for another 222 yards, 4 touchdowns on a 17 of 24 completion percentage, 9.3 yards per attempt. So obviously you can see he's not dinking and dunking. He's not being a casual running quarterback. When you look at the prototypical running quarterback, you think of, oh, he can't throw. No, this man is pushing the ball downfield and constantly testing the defense. And you also look at the fact that he's got 93.3 QBR against the Texans to go along with 9 carries and 86 yards. On the season, however, he's 66.3% completion percentage. That's up from him being in the mid 50s last year, which is phenomenal. I mean, to have that big of a jump, you can tell he's been improving as the season goes on, and he really put in the work over the offseason. I mean, you look at all the storylines in the news, you could see that he was working all offseason, but we didn't quite know what we were going to get. We saw him go out in ugly fashion against the Chargers last offseason. And so to see a jump like this, it gives him an extra boost, I think, in the MVP conversation. Even though you could argue that it shouldn't, that should be only for the most improved award when you talk about jump from season to season. But unfortunately, it does have weight in the conversation. So you can argue whether that should have relevance, but I'm not going to argue that for this topic because I think that's a whole topic in of itself. But he's also thrown for 2,258 yards, 19 touchdowns, 5 interceptions, which is pretty good for what was considered a running quarterback, quote unquote. And also he's gone for 788 rushing yards and 6 touchdowns, which, I mean, we already knew what he was going to do from the standpoint of running it coming into this season. So the fact that he's on pace to break Michael Vick's rushing record, I mean, he was on undisputed. Michael Vick was last night, I think, or not last night, but yesterday morning. And he was talking about how he never thought that anybody, especially not Lamar Jackson, would ever be able to break his rushing record for a QB, rushing for the most yards as a QB. And yet here we are. And Lamar Jackson is on pace to break that record. And so that adds historical relevance to his MVP campaign. And when you look at it, I just look at how the Ravens are playing right now. I mean, again, they beat the Texans 41-7. The Texans are a pretty good football team. We've been talking about them also throughout these weeks and how Deshaun Watson has been able to lead the Texans onto what had been a decent season up to this point, but they just came out and smacked them. I mean, from the opening jump, like from the kickoff, you knew that the Ravens were the more dominant team, and that, speaks to how they've constructed their team, but also it speaks to Lamar Jackson. And you just look at the game film also. You look at the game film and you see the first throw even that he threw to, I believe it was Mark Andrews. Or it was either Mark Andrews or Hayden Hurst. I can't exactly remember. I don't have the highlight right in front of me, but he was able to just rifle it in there. I mean, his throwing motion is pure and it's accurate, even though it's a little bit awkward from the standpoint of just the way it looks. I mean, it comes out like a whip, the ball does. So, I mean, as long as it's accurate, I mean, that I'm game. And with his performance this week, you also see that he jumped to second in the league for QBR. He's tied with Dak for second, I think 77.8 QBR, which just further proves that this dude is doing phenomenal things. And I get that people argue with Russell Wilson saying he has less, but let's be real. Lamar Jackson doesn't have the most weapons. People act like he has this explosive offense with weapons all around him. No, he has a decent O line, a good set of tight ends, and Mark Andrews and Hayden Hurst, who he's comfortable with, who he's formed a chemistry with, which I think jumps and elevates their game even more. So to where you think, oh, these guys are phenomenal, when, yeah, they're pretty good, but I don't think that they're the weapons that some of these other tight ends are in the league. And also, you look at his receivers, outside of Marquise Brown, who's also a very young receiver, and so you have to take into account he's having to create this chemistry as they go along in the season. You look at his other receivers, they're nothing truly special. And so you look at it, I believe that most of the success is due to Lamar and due to his improvement, which just further elevates him in the MVP conversation. And also, you have to attribute it to, I believe his name is Greg Roman, the offensive coordinator that they got, who was actually Colin Kaepernick's coach for the 49ers. And so centering that offense around Lamar Jackson has only elevated his play. And so when you look at him compared to Russell Wilson, we talked about it last week. I mean, Russell Wilson has played phenomenally. And I'm not taking anything away from him, because when you tend to argue between two players in the MVP conversation, it looks like you're taking away from one dude and putting more onto another. And I don't want to do that. Russell Wilson is phenomenal. But Lamar Jackson, what he's doing is historical, and you have to give credit where credit is due when it comes to the MVP award. I mean, this is, to me, just a recap, or a repeat of history, really, when it comes to Lamar Jackson and his success. I mean, this is what happened when he won the Heisman. Deshaun Watson was phenomenal. And at first, when I was, being a biased Clemson fan, I thought Deshaun Watson should have won the Heisman back then. But now, when I look at what Lamar Jackson was able to do with that Louisville team and elevating their play and taking them to new heights and his historic stats, I realized that he should have won the Heisman. I think it's the same way with this MVP conversation. I believe that Lamar Jackson, he's just doing things that nobody else has done, and he's doing it in a different way. He's revolutionizing the way we think about quarterbacks. We talked about that last week, me and Hassan did, and how you should see a shift in how people draft these days with how Lamar Jackson is playing, because when you looked at how to draft quarterbacks before, you looked at and you said, oh, let me look at all his attributes, his height, his weight, how he looks in the pocket, his throwing motion, when we really should be looking at how good the player played in college and how good is he really based on his talent level. And we look at, the class that Lamar Jackson came out of when it comes to the draft class. Lamar Jackson was by far the most talented quarterback out of all of them. He could do the most things as a football player, but he was drafted last out of all the main quarterbacks because people, wanted to look at others' heights and their completion percentage and all these different stats, and they let it block out and block their sight of how good this man Lamar Jackson is. And so that's why he dropped all the way to the bottom of the first round, and the Ravens were able to pick him up. And honestly, I'm so happy that Lamar Jackson went to the Ravens, because he was able to go into a perfect situation because he went at the bottom of the first round. And so when you look at it, I think teams will start to draft these players that are more talented coming out of college, but might not be the prototypical quarterback. I think you'll see more of those type of quarterbacks drafted due to Lamar Jackson. And also, I think from a player's perspective, the players are going to start to think more of, I want to go to a team that is in a great position rather than going to the highest pick. Because when you go to the highest pick, you're usually going to get in a disastrous situation. Whereas if you go in the bottom of the first round, you may go to a team that may already have a quarterback, and you can grow and learn under the system, and you can get coaches that want you to be there and want you to mold a system around you. And so I feel like the way that Lamar Jackson is changing the league, I think that you just have to look at that and be in awe of that. And I believe that takes him over the top of Russell Wilson, who is having, again, a great season, but we've seen some of the similar seasons to Russell Wilson. He's not doing anything that's truly historic. He's doing things that are great in every category, but just not that historic level. And so I think you have to reward the historic season over somebody who's just playing super, consistent, decent football, if that makes sense. And if you disagree with me, you can go down the comment section and we can have a conversation about it. I try and answer to every comment that I get. And so if you disagree with me, go ahead and comment about it and we can have a lively debate about it. And, it doesn't need to be an argument. It can be a lively debate. And so before I leave this topic about the Ravens and the Texans, I just want to say that, as a big fan of Deshaun Watson, man, the Texans need to really start to improve that offensive line. I felt like earlier in the season that you could say that the offensive line had improved with the pickup of Laramie Tunsil and the drafting of Titus Howard, I think is his name. They drafted him near the bottom of the first round as a tackle, and I think they moved him around to guard and just moved him around the offensive line. I felt like they had improved, but it looks like they've taken another step back because, Deshaun got sacked another 6 times. That's unacceptable. That's truly unacceptable. And so when you look at it, Deshaun, you can argue that he caused some of those sacks. Excuse me. You can argue that he ran his way into some of those sacks. But you can also say that you can just look at the tape. And you could see as my roommates come into the room, if you can hear that. But to get back on topic, you could see that Deshaun Watson was getting harassed the entire game. And this was against a Ravens D-line that hadn't gotten a lot of pressure. They're not a D-line that's built to, put a lot of pressure on the quarterback. They're more built to stop the run. And yet he gets sacked 6 times. And so I just feel like they need to improve their offensive line before they become serious contenders. But Deshaun, he also played bad. You look at it, a 9 QBR, 18 of 29 for 169 yards, 0 touchdowns, 1 pick, and only a 5.8 yards per attempt. That's unacceptable also from the quarterback position. But I believe he can improve as the season goes on, and he'll bounce back. He's established himself as one of the great young quarterbacks in the league, so I'm not too worried about that. They just need to get him some blockers, man, because, my God, he cannot keep on getting hit like this and be expected to play at the level he's expected to play at, and that's the bottom line. And so that's really all I got to say about the Texans. It was a disappointing performance because we expected this to be one of the premier games of the season, and it fell flat from that. The Ravens completely dominated the game from the first snap of the game. And so if you like this video, hit the like button. And also, if you're new to the channel, hit that subscribe button. And also, click the notification bell so you never miss an upload or a stream.